My life has been outrageous. Subscribe or follow me as I unveil the wild experiences that shaped who I am, including multiple experiences with sensing that there was a dead body in the area where I was at the time. Take a listen to discover more. People are always like, "You have the weirdest things happen to you." I know, right? I've had to learn to laugh about some of the darkest, most unimaginable experiences. So I tend to laugh a bit as I relate my experiences to others, and they look at me like, "How can you laugh about that?" Mind you, I never find other people's misfortune funny, only my own. Because if it didn't happen to me, I wouldn't believe these kind of things could happen, like all the time. My life has truly been a suspense action thriller. So stay tuned so you get the details. Just go ahead and follow or subscribe now and buckle up. It's a wild ride. You've heard the phrase, "One day we'll look back at this and laugh." Studies have actually shown that the quicker you move to laughter after a shock or trauma, which changes your emotional state, the healthier emotions and body will be. This is an example of finding the benefit or humor in the tragedy or situation. Welcome to the Way of the Phoenix. This episode is Finding Comedy in Your Tragedy. This one's filled with unfortunate personal stories, with surprising amount of humor to be extracted. I'll show you some ways to overcome your hardships and find the humor in your life. In this episode, you'll be entertained with some wild adventures with a running gunman, a murder motel, and a COVID shutdown that affected me to this day. It's hard to even say it. It was that bad. How my intuition about a dead body turned out. I'll teach you how I used that tragedy to launch new ways to succeed. I'll show you how reframing your perspectives and doing new things with old problems adds benefit and countless possibilities. And I'll tease you with some tidbits about my comedy bit, The Naughty Cougar. Join me to find comedy in your tragedy. So let's go back ways, and I'll tell you about my emergency trip to the hospital when I was pregnant with my daughter a few decades ago. Men, stay with me. I started having labor at 16 weeks, and that's way too early. I continued to have preterm labor until I was 32 weeks. And for my guy followers, which is the majority of you, most pregnancies should be around 40 weeks. I got to spend the last 3 months of the pregnancy flat on my back in bed, gestating. That's all I could do, gestate. The doctor decided in order for my daughter and I to both survive, she would have to induce the baby to come early. I'll tell you, if I didn't want that baby so much, it would have been impossible to lay there and do nothing for 3 months. I'm hyperactive and possibly a recovering overachiever. It was tough. One night when I was 24 weeks along, I started having serious, regular contractions and excruciating pain. So I called my doctor and it was met with great urgency. She said, "Get to the emergency room immediately, or it could be fatal for you and your baby." My daughter was very anxious to be born. You need to know that diabetic ketoacidosis is not a trendy diet choice. It's a serious condition that can lead to a diabetic coma or death. It's not trivial. So let me tell you how that went. My husband at that time, but no longer, is driving like a bat out of hell, and suddenly we hear a siren behind us, and we're just praying it's not for us. But of course it is. And the officer saunters up to the window real leisurely like and asks, "Why are you in such a hurry?" And my husband said, "She's pregnant. She's having premature labor, and she has gestational diabetes, and she's passing ketones. This is life-threatening. I have to get her to the emergency room now." And the officer says, we'll see. I'm thinking, great. While he's checking out our story, I'm going to have the baby in the car or go into a coma. And I'm starting to freak out. And finally he comes back and said, yeah, I called the emergency room and they're actually expecting you. So slow down and I won't give you a ticket today. And we're thinking, gee, thanks, officer. We're already dangerously delayed. A police escort would have been nice, but no. So now my husband drives like a Sunday driving grandpa to the hospital. As soon as we got there, the nurses are trying to get me into a room immediately. So my nurse gets me into a wheelchair and starts wheeling me down the hall real fast. And suddenly it's like a scene straight out of a satire comedy. This nurse comes rushing down the hall, waving her arms and saying, no, not yet. So my nurse turns around and rushes me back to the start. And after a few minutes, she starts wheeling me down the hall again. Now a different nurse comes screaming down the hallway and says, no, you can't take her back. So my nurse wheels me back to the beginning again. Pretty soon she starts wheeling me down the hall. And for the third time, unbelievably, someone intercepts us and says, no, she can't come back yet. And I looked at my nurse and I said, what the hell is going on here? Do you want me to have this baby in the wheelchair right now? Or are you going to get me into a room immediately? And she looked around as she was trying to see if anybody was listening, and she leaned in and said, I'm not supposed to tell you, but there's an armed robbery at the bank across the street. The gunman is on a foot chase with the police, and he's running down the halls and up and down the elevator naked with a gun. Okay, now I'm thinking, well, this is weird, even for me, because I've been through some crazy shit. Even if I have trouble believing my luck on this one. But seriously, a naked gunman? So presumably he dropped his clothes believing that the police dogs couldn't track him if he was naked? Right. So I ask her, when do you think you can get me in a room? And she says, I really want to, but we have to be sure you're safe. So we wait and wait. And I'm in labor, so I'm in a lot of pain. And I'm worried I'll slip into a coma. And I'm shaking and half terrified I'm going to lose my baby. But I'm half amused at the naked gun guy. Finally, they get the okay and put me in a room. After a while, they got the labor to stop. Thank God. And for Valentine's Day, I had a romantic 3-day stay in the hospital bed, alone, with a constant insulin drip to regulate my glucose. I have definitely laughed over the years at that bizarre experience. Well, there was the gunman and then the labor and all of it. So experiences. Another time I had to find comedy was a very creepy situation. Let me tell you about it. A woman I cared deeply about was having what she calls a come apart. Her life was imploding, and she was contemplating divorce and ending herself, which unfortunately was a frequent ideation as a severe trauma survivor. Yeah, stutter even thinking about it. I reasoned with her that she was better off to change her circumstances than take the negative permanent route. And I invited her to come and stay with me for a while. And I could do somatic emotional release work. That's helping to heal the body and emotions together. And other emotional reframing work. I know a lot of techniques. So she quit her job and ran away to visit me to find herself and some peace. I know that immersing yourself in the beauty of nature has scientifically proven benefits for the mind and body. So I took her to every favorite beautiful place in Washington to renew her soul. And that's why I live in Washington. It's stunningly beautiful. She took over 5,000 pictures on our adventures. Because when she got home, she could vividly remember those amazing times and scenes. anytime she wanted and feel all that relief, awe, and joy again, just looking at them. You can also learn to do that with neurolinguistic programming, which I use a lot with my coaching clients. Anyway, we figured out a weekend at Rialto Beach would set her world right for a while. So we checked into the only motel we could find because all of the local lodging was booked due to a high school class reunion. And it's near one of my favorite beaches in the world on the Olympic Peninsula. Interestingly, around 16 miles from where the Twilight series were filmed. We were a little worried that people who really believe in that whole deal would show up. The locals told us that apparently some people get a bit too involved with that storyline and believe they're really going to see vampires and werewolves in the forest there. Scary. As we pulled into the motel, we were less than impressed with the upkeep, but at least we got a room. We checked in, got our key, and proceeded to take a look around our suite, if you could call it that. It was dingy, stinky, old carpet, and had a powerfully dark, ominous feeling that repelled you from the threshold of the room. All 3 rooms had the energy as if we had just stepped into the Bates Motel from the movie Psycho. In the bathroom, the toilet seat was neatly wrapped with a white paper banner that proclaimed, "Sanitized for your convenience," with a long black hair draped over the top. And there were pubes in the bathtub. That's not what I would call sanitized. Like, gag me, right? Ugh. So, based on past experiences with this kind of horrifying energy in a hotel room and other experiences I've had, I pulled back the sheet and the mattress cover, and to my horror, the mattress was splattered with a lot of blood, for real. And that's exactly what I discovered in another hotel room, probably 20 years before, when I felt that ominous vibe. I recognized the energy and knew exactly what it was. And aren't they supposed to replace mattresses from a murder scene? So we laughed nervously and discussed maybe having to sleep in the car if that was the only room available. And hoping that we wouldn't have to, we went to the front desk and I told the lady, "If you can't find us a different room, we want our money back. It's filthy. And it looks and feels like someone has been murdered in there." And she blurted out, "That's not the only room people have been murdered in. I live here at the motel. I know." Seriously, she said that. That's some customer service, right? So I said, "Well, could you find us a room where no one has been dismembered?" Presumably she did. We were not at ease in this whole situation, and it didn't help my companion with her death fixation at all. I took a picture of the name of the hotel and texted it to my daughter and told her, "We're staying at the murder motel, and if you don't hear from us in the morning, send the police, really." It's not exactly the getaway we were hoping for, but we made it into the beach a little later in the day for a glorious reset of our emotions and vibrations. And yes, we have looked back at that and laughed for sure. You can't make this stuff up. I had also felt that dark, horrifying energy years before, while just taking a leisurely walk through a park in Kent, Washington with my friend. And as we were walking past a deeply wooded ravine, I felt murder vibes wafting up, and I looked at her and said, "There's a dead body down there." And she looked at me very alarmed, and I didn't want to explain any further. And I was right. Over a decade later, it's where they found one of the Green River Killer's victims. It's not always a benefit to be so energetically sensitive, but I've learned to work with it. Also, unbelievably, I lived in Idaho when all that stuff was going on, and where I live now is within 5 miles of where Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer, lived on his serial killing spree. Seriously. Creepy. So switching gears a little bit, let me tell you how COVID worked for me in Washington in 2020. COVID shutdown was hell for me. Ironically, I was taking a stand-up comedy class in February of 2020, and just before my graduation performance, our state was totally shut down and quarantined due to the COVID pandemic. And I didn't get to do my naughty cougar bit. It was disappointing. The first cases of COVID in the nation were in Washington state. Many businesses were forcibly closed, including my business and the Tacoma Comedy Club. Consequently, when we were all quarantined, it meant that my way of helping, healing, and sharing through personal coaching and somatic emotional release techniques, which means body and emotions, it got shut down too. I needed to reframe the situation because I didn't laugh about this at all. So I made a flyer for myself that I posted in my bedroom, and it said, "Find comedy in your tragedy." During this time, I studied stand-up comedy techniques in various books and wrote short, funny experiences of my life for a while to begin reframing my perspectives. I looked for the benefit, which was extra time to spend doing other things and learning like I was in a master's program. I began learning neurolinguistic programming, hypnotherapy, and how to do all my healing practices like Qigong and personal empowerment coaching over the internet. Turns out it allows me to reach many more people. So there's a benefit. Didn't feel like it at the time. I want to dive a little deeper into the perspective of reframing of the COVID experience. This time of COVID shutdowns was one of the most difficult times I have ever experienced. And that's saying something outside of the health crises in my life. Our governor, who was Jay Inslee, made us shelter in place with no outside contact except to go to the grocery store and pharmacy for weeks. We couldn't bring family that didn't live with us into our homes or friends or anyone. And I was utterly alone. No relief or comfort in sight. He shut down the business of anyone considered not essential workers because the rest of us were just disposable. I've always been self-employed, and it took months for the state to provide any unemployment compensation, even though I was forced to shut down, which meant no income for months. Thankfully, I had a little in savings, and I'd had an intuitive urgency nudge before COVID that I needed to pay off all my credit card debt and all other debt besides my mortgage. Thankfully, I did, because I could have not made those payments with the debt I had before COVID if I hadn't listened to and taken action with that prompting and paid it all off. It's really important to listen to your intuitive nudges or promptings. The governor went a little crazy with this state of emergency power. He restricted driving. Yeah, you couldn't even go somewhere by yourself that was not completely necessary, and qualified it as going to buy groceries because he shut down restaurants. And you could go get your medication. And if you weren't one of the few jobs considered essential workers, then you couldn't drive. Only they could drive. He shut schools down and forced even the youngest children into online learning, and they did not thrive. I have a grandchild who was in kindergarten at that time, so I know the negative effect. And the governor literally used traffic cameras to track the licenses of people driving so he could track individuals. He actually had a news conference to scare us all letting us know that we were being tracked. And he threatened to have the National Guard essentially deputized to arrest those leaving their homes instead of sheltering in place. Churches were closed, so any spiritual camaraderie of like-minded individuals was also cut off, which is very important to a lot of people. It was unfreaking believable. Meanwhile, in other states, none of this happened. I know I have relatives in Utah where they didn't shut down anything. They masked for perhaps a week. Schools were open, businesses were open, and they thrived. We did not. I was cut off from any income for months, and I had no guarantee that I would get any. I couldn't teach my Qigong classes, do personal coaching, or anything. I had difficulty believing that I could be forced to not work while also not be compensated and isolated. It took a serious toll on me. I had to dig really deep to find the optimism that I would somehow make it through the crisis. The only loan I qualified for, and I looked at all of them, gave me a mere $1,000 through the Small Business Administration. Meanwhile, pro ball teams were getting hundreds of thousands. Yeah, because they're small businesses. And as a bonus, all of my personal information was compromised during a hack of the information of the applicants for that SBA loan. And also the state of Washington Employment Security, where $646 million was stolen. Oh, and they just included my bank account routing numbers to the hackers. Good times. Eventually, months later, I received a whopping $211 per week to live on. I have a mortgage and adult bills. It's hard to buy groceries for that. It was devastating. I will be working until I die to make up for the choices of a man who doesn't even know me in America. And just to add a little more trauma for me, my longtime boyfriend and I had broken up in December, 2 months prior, and I was still grieving substantially. Essentially, every one of my most basic needs was compromised, with no solution in sight. I was reduced to the lowest rung on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which I'll cover in more detail in a later episode. It didn't end there. Can you believe it? I was forced to take a COVID vaccine in order to keep my healthcare license. And I might have chosen to anyway, but I resented being forced in the land of the free. I did fine with my first vaccine, but it was the second. And it took such a toll on my adrenal glands with all the additional stress that I just described. And I had a prolonged, life-threatening adrenal crisis that included hypothermia with body temperatures hovering at 94 and 95 for almost 8 weeks, regardless of how many layers of clothes I had on and heated blankets and everything I could think of to stay warm. I was reduced to fighting to live once again. I later learned that the mRNA drastically affects the pituitary, adrenal glands, and the heart. And all of these are involved in adrenal crisis. And I hadn't had one of these in decades. And I didn't think I was going to live. Yeah, I did think I was losing. I didn't think I was going to live that time. And I was unwilling to go back on living on prednisone to live. I was in the hospital about every 3 weeks when they had me on prednisone, getting like 200 to 300 milligrams of prednisone put in my IV to keep my heart from stopping. That was hell. And then I had my medical miracle. I was able, and still am, able to live without prednisone with a I only have a partial pituitary gland, and I have secondary adrenal insufficiency, which I manage with dealing with my stress levels And when they get really high and I get shaky, I take different measures to help boost my body into its natural healing response. I'm not recommending that for everyone. Take care of your health, work with your doctors if you have conditions like this. But this is my route. Anyway, thank God I knew that the energy work that I teach and practice, combined with my faith, which is truly unshakable, and bovine adrenal supplements and others that I could order online and actually get delivered during COVID lockdown, would heal me. Additionally, I had my friends and family praying for me. And I believe that prayer is the most powerful force on the planet, especially for me. And with all of the techniques combined, I gradually began to regain my strength and health and spend as much time as I could involved in learning and doing these healing practices. I'm fully healed from that crisis now, emotionally, physically, spiritually. And I feel so grateful. It's really interesting as I was writing this episode, and frequently when I try to write the word grateful, I have to really think about it because at first my brain spells it great, like Great, as in amazing, and then full, Full. All the decades of personal development provides me with a wonderful Freudian slip, showing me that my mind believes that I am full of greatness. Woohoo! Next, I started to renew my emotional healing journey. I had to work hard to forgive a man, the governor, who appeared to have no concern for me as a state resident, so for me personally, and also as self-employed business owner, and many others in similar conditions. Only my son, who was in computer manufacturing, was working out of my entire family and their spouses. I have to tell you, I struggled to understand the absolute breakdown of the right to work, to mingle, and to even drive. It really blew my mind. Freedom is my top value. I prize the right to choose my thoughts, lifestyle, associations, career, and all else. And things were being forced on me that I couldn't imagine happening in the United States. I was feeling lonely, sad, fearful, and uncertain about the future, outraged while experiencing poverty and extreme physical illness. It was an all-out crisis, but certainly not my first. I knew I couldn't stay in these feelings and expect to live. So I had to dig deep down in faith, hope, and determination to create a new path and heal. Events of this magnitude affect your health and well-being to the point of changing the epigenetic code in your DNA to reflect that trauma in your gene expression. You can't thrive if you stay in this state. In other words, it messes up everything, and it keeps you that way until you consciously change it. I'll explore epigenetics just a lot more thoroughly in an upcoming episode. Learning about it was one of the most empowering concepts and perspectives that I've ever learned, and it's all about science. So during this time, I practiced many reframing exercises, hypnotherapy, Reiki, Qigong, emotional freedom technique, thought field therapy sessions for myself to overcome all my negative emotions, like the complete outrage of being financially devastated and being delayed in my ability to retire while drawing heavily on savings, and also overcoming sincere rage that I could be prevented from earning money and caring for myself and others. The more negative emotions surface, and then I just had to keep working and overcoming and reframing those. I think the hardest emotion for me to overcome in order to heal and grow in new directions was true rage. And I'm not an angry person. I know how destructive that anger can be if you don't use it constructively. You can use anger as a way to move you in a different direction. But I was well beyond anger. I was afraid it was going to kill me, and I felt it was impossible circumstances in the beginning that I'd been carelessly placed in by the governor, and not just me, a lot of others. And being the indomitable woman that I am, I reasoned the governor does not own the internet, and anything I can do over the internet would serve me well in that crisis and in the future. And because I have a long history of overcoming what seems impossible, I started to explore what other options I could find to provide additional income. And I concluded that I would teach my Qigong and personal empowerment guidance, which is like life coaching, with online classes. And I developed new courses and topics. You'll be able to access them in my membership part of the website, offered on my social media. Anyway, I'm going to tell you more about my membership program where you can get these amazing programs soon. I'm launching it soon. I began implementing solutions that I thought would work, and I dove into online training to expand my coaching skills and added hypnotherapy, and I got a state license as a hypnotherapist. And I expanded my training and skills in the field of energy work, which does not have limitations such as being in the same proximity as those you're mentoring or providing energy balancing work and healing for. It can be done through distance. It's amazing. I studied hundreds of hours of Reiki, and no, it's not witchcraft, and hypnotherapy, as well as programs for teaching groups of people simultaneously. And I worked longer hours studying during COVID than ever before, including college. Eventually, I came to a place of acceptance, release, and optimism. It took every bit of all of the knowledge and empowering techniques that I share in this podcast and my social media. But I eventually reframed the devastation into acceptance of a new life path. And after more than a year, my business was allowed to reopen and clients began to trickle back in. Many people were still afraid of catching COVID. I really do have a block from that. It was so bad, I have difficulty saying the word. And so my coaching business was launched online because of COVID. Yeah, I still don't laugh about that, but maybe one day. And it has allowed me to start trusting my journey more fully with the things that I'm sharing with you right now. So why have I shared these outrageous experiences with you? I want you to see how to extract a benefit from every tragedy and difficulty in your life. One way we can do that is changing the context, the setting, or the point of view of the experience, and that's known as reframing. Look for the benefit or the blessing in the trial. That's also reframing. Seeing a long-term, broader perspective is reframing. It takes creativity to become good at reframing, but a simple one should catch on. You can learn to take an ordinary event and reframe it and actually get some pleasure out of it, or at least a useful life lesson. Or you can take devastating ones like the ones I've described and reframe them. When you find the benefit, your subconscious mind can let go of the trauma and devastation and move into maintaining your health and creating more opportunities. And I'll be covering this topic in much more detail in other episodes, so stay with me, and get subscribed. I may be working, sharing, learning, and growing until I leave this planet due to the financial devastation of the involuntary closure of my business. Now, with the life skills I'm sharing, I have the ability to share life-transforming, utterly healing practices with others who face stress, difficulty, or trauma in their lives. It might have taken me many years longer to fully embrace this new path of helping others transform without this forced change of direction. One of the outcomes is a full-on commitment to sharing my journey, knowledge, and perspectives in this podcast and on other social media. I recently learned through my YouTube channel analytics that my insights are being downloaded all over the world. In the first 15 days of really working with posts, empowerment posts, if you will, I saw that 2 people downloaded information from my channel in South Korea. Wow. So, if my original plan had worked, I would have been far more limited in my reach and who I could help. So here's my quest, and I hope you'll join me. I want to start a movement called the Way of the Phoenix, bettering people's lives dramatically, because I'm kind of dramatic if you haven't noticed. Help me reach my goal of 1 million subscribers and followers by subscribing now. If this is benefiting and encouraging you, like it and share it with others. It will have a positive effect globally. It already is. I recently bought a mug coaster to set beverages on that says, "You're so funny." Thanks. It's from all the trauma. So remember, turn your tragedy into comedy. So in conclusion, I've just shared with you some wild adventures with a naked gunman, a murder motel, and a COVID shutdown that affects me to this day, and how I use that tragedy to launch new ways to succeed. I talked with you about reframing your perspective to find a benefit, and I teased you a little bit about my naughty cougar comedy bit. Maybe I'll share that in another episode. Just remember, find the comedy in your tragedy. I'm honored to be your personal empowerment guide on your very own action adventure production, your life. I trust that if you apply the principles you've learned today in your life, it will be more manageable and fun. Because if it isn't fun, find another way to do it. If you find value and benefit in the information and stories I share, tell your friends and join my movement, The Way of the Phoenix, so that more people can like and find my content and make their lives better. And if you want to contribute financially, I'll be setting up a way that you can contribute to my channel and to the information that I'm sharing with the world. And you can find more information about that on my website, thewayofthephoenix.com. And by the way, both of my books are available on Amazon. One is Turning Trials into Triumphs, The Way of the Phoenix, and From Victim into Victor, The Ultimate Guide to Overcoming Trauma, Abuse, and PTSD. And get ready for the next episode, and remember, it's your life. Live it, love it. Hey, help me out here. I would love to see where in the globe this episode is being listened to. So please comment and tell me where you're listening, and tell me what you think about this podcast. Thanks so much. I'm Phoenix Alexander. Bye.